you say 13 hours is a fairly quick turnaround, obviously by any standards.
This has been an amazing effort by all crews involved, and this just goes to show how partnerships, emergency planning goes into play when a significant incident happens.
Can you just explain, though, how difficult the firefight was? You're suggesting that 13 hours, they got it out and under control fairly quickly. How challenging that was and what risk it posed to the entire complex?
I might pass on to our incident controller, ACFO Anthony Pearce.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Michelle. I just want to reaffirm Michelle's comments there. The crews from Viva, firefighters in particular, have done an amazing job. The initial application of the fixed firefighting equipment on site has definitely contained this fire to the original area, and the work they've done to be able to isolate the fuel supply to the area affected has been amazing, and I cannot understate how much the crews have done an amazing job. In the early stages of the fire, it was very, very dangerous and there were explosions occurring, so it was very important that we got a clear picture of what was occurring. Crews on scene would take appropriate safety precautions while also putting themselves at risk to be able to get the water onto the fire to stop it from spreading. So that early intervention is what's made this fire be brought under control so quickly. As the Deputy said, the critical part here is emergency planning and exercising that takes place at these locations, combined with the regulatory arrangements behind the scene, is what's made today's incident, or last night's incident, be brought to a safe conclusion to this point in time. There is still a lot of work to go. We still need to make the area safe. There is still a lot of flammable materials in the area that's affected by fire, and we're working with Viva to ensure that is isolated and there are no further ignitions. The remainder of the plant still is functioning, although every action that occurs on this plant potentially has an impact on the area of fire. So we're working with Viva to ensure that whatever actions are taken in and around the fire or across the rest of the plant don't lead to any further instances.
Can you describe the automated firefighting technology? What does it actually do? How does that look like? Because most of us don't know that.
So at a major refinery site like this, we have a lot of large volume pipelines, firefighting equipment, fixed installed firefighting nozzles. Viva themselves have their own firefighting crew and fire appliances which they're able to tactically deploy to project large volumes of water onto the affected area. They have very solid entrenched firefighting systems, including pumps, backup pumps, to be able to sustain prolonged firefighting. All the firewater runoff initially was contained on site, and appropriate testing was done to ensure that there was no serious level of contamination in that firewater before we allowed it to be discharged out into the bay. So at all times, our focus as responders has been on the community safety, not just for the impacts of the fire, but the consequences of the fire.
So there's essentially a large sprinkler system in there when there's a fire that it automatically deploys?
The area involved would use the fixed installed firefighting, so effectively think of it as big hoses permanently mounted onto pipelines.
Can you just explain as well, it was mentioned this morning that there was a gas leak, and it was just mentioned before about the mechanical faults. Are those two obviously linked? And is that mechanical fault the fact that there was a gas leak, or was there a multitude of failures that led to the gas leak?
So the actual mechanisms that caused it, we're still investigating, but there was a leak of gas from a mechanical component in the system. The gases then appeared to have ignited, but the details of the investigation will come to light in further days to come.
So it's the ignition source that you're trying to work out at this point? Is that
all aspects of the cause of the fire, both the release of the flammable material and what caused it to ignite, will be subject to investigation.
What about we talked about that when the fire happened, and you say diesel petrol refinery is still working. Is there any impact then on what's coming out of this plant? In terms of the supplies to Victoria, clearly a lot of area has been damaged. Sort of clarification on how this will impact the diesel and the petrol that comes out of this plant, how long those impacts will be.
I'll stand aside and ask Viva to speak.
Yeah. My name's Bill Patterson. Just in answer to that question, we have taken, as a result of last night's incident, we have taken some steps to make sure that the rest of the plant is running as safely as possible. Typically that doesn't mean stopping everything. Typically that just means bringing the rates down and running the place at a lower rate. And we're doing that while we're both making the site out there completely safe, getting access to it, and understanding much more detail about the damage that was done on the back of last night's incident.
How much down is the production lowered?
Look, it's really hard to put specific numbers on it because it's quite a dynamic situation. In terms of what we find out there, when we get better access to the site, following the end of the incident, that'll inform how that looks. But it is fair to say that we're still making petrol, diesel, and jet fuel at pretty decent rates. So it hasn't been a very large impact at this stage, but obviously as we work through the full implications of the events of last night, we'll keep looking at that.
Bill, is there a risk of contamination given some of the equipment's been damaged, that some of the existing stock that's already passed through may have been contaminated by the fire?
It's unlikely, to be honest. I think the material that we continue to make is being made in units that are quite separate from the ones that were impacted last night.
What has been damaged?
Sorry?
What has been? We heard about what hasn't been damaged in terms of the production line. What has been damaged?
Yeah, so there's a specific couple of units that were impacted by the events of last night, and they relate to a part of the refinery that combines the LPG to make gasoline type molecules. So molecules are used for gasoline blending and some other specialty products. So that's what's been damaged by the events of last night. Obviously, we've still got to look into the full extent of the damage as we get better and better access to the scene, and that's definitely very much a work in progress.
There's equipment faults or that's been to blame. I think you mentioned this morning that you're confident that the infrastructure here, that's the whole complex is more than 7 years old. That ageing infrastructure shouldn't be an issue.
So yeah, just to pick you up, we've been operating on this site, or this site's been operational as a refinery for 70 years. That doesn't mean everything on the site's 70 years old. So the condition of the equipment that was involved in this event will be definitely part of the investigation. We are determined to not have events like this happen again. It's not what we want or how we want to operate. So we're determined to learn from that.
Considering it's failed and it's obviously had an impact on the business and will have an impact on
Yeah, well, look, we'll do a thorough investigation into this incident and we will learn from it. And if that means that we look more broadly than just the area that we're looking at, that'll be what we do, and we'll do that in conjunction with all the relevant authorities.
Can you just run us through exactly what happened? So 11 o'clock last night, the fire broke out in a part of the plant that makes motoring fuel because of a system fault, and then there was a gas explosion. What happened after that?
Yeah, so the exact sequence of events, I think as Anthony mentioned, it's still subject to investigation. We really need to take a step back and look at exactly all the information that we've got to build up the full sequence of events. So I don't want to get ahead of that right now. We've certainly started to do that, but it will take some time to do that thoroughly. There's a lot of information and a lot of data that's available. We need to make sure we take full account of all of that, so that we learn from this incident and don't have a repeat.
We obviously have a fuel crisis at the moment, trying to get as much into the country as possible as well. Was this plant refining more than usual in response to this issue that we're having, and could that have impacted why we had a fire last night? Would that be a contributing factor that you're running above?
Yeah, so no, the specific part of the refinery where we had the issue last night wasn't running in any sort of abnormal conditions that we've determined. Obviously, we still need to investigate the exact sequence of events last night, but in terms of how we had been running it in the weeks running into this issue, and since the disruptions in the Middle East, there hasn't been anything unusual or extraordinary.
Do you have a time frame from when the leak was detected by your internal safety teams and when FRV were called in? Was it almost immediate?
Look, I don't have that to hand. that will be available, and that will be looked at. So when we look at the investigation, we'll look at both the causal elements, but also the response. By our procedures, as soon as a major alarm was sounded, and that was sounded very early in after the discovery of the issues, as soon as that sounded, automatically FRV is called to site.
And just on that, is there usually people working physically in close proximity to these two units that were damaged? I know no one was injured, but is there usually people around?
Yeah, so we have a crew of about 45 to 50 employees that work around the clock on the site. That's the operator work group, and so that was the work group that was in at the site last night. While a lot of the operators work in control rooms and in other areas of the plant, yes, there are operators that, as we call it, do rounds and are present in the plant. So
there would have been people in close proximity, the alarms went off, they were moved away safely?
Look, I think we'll cover all of what that looked like as part of the full investigation, including the investigation into the response. But I would say that so far as, I just echo what Anthony has said around the quality of the response, not just like the operator group, who are all trained as many of whom are trained as auxiliary firefighters, did an amazing job, but we were very quickly supported and backed up by FRV, and FRV as a controlling authority came in and really ran a really good response.
How does the days going forward look? You've already said you're operating at the reduced kind of capacity at the moment. How does that look going forward in the days ahead, and how are you still going to continue to meet your obligations when it comes to how much fuel you provide to Victoria and the country?
Yeah, look, our first priority is to make sure that everyone on site remains safe. So the safety checks and the stepping through, making sure things are safe before we start sort of moving up to higher production rates is really critical to that. So I don't want to preempt exactly what that looks like, because I don't want to put a hurry up on that at the expense of and create further risk. That said, the other parts of the plant that weren't impacted, largely they're running relatively steadily and well at the moment. So it's not like we're going to be coming up from a low base, but exactly what that looks like will have to be worked through in the days ahead.
Specifically, what about petrol? Because, as you said this morning, diesel and aviation fuel carrying on as normal, but what about petrol, considering the two units that were damaged specifically relate to petrol?
Yeah, so we've got substantial stocks of petrol, and our supply, apart from the petrol that we make here at the refinery, we do import petrol into the country. We also have arrangements with other participants in supply markets. So I think we're, on the basis of our outlook, we're pretty confident that there's not going to be an issue on that front.
And the distribution of that fuel, I know you said the refining now is decent. I think it was word used before, not the number of it's still decent, but actually getting it out of here to the houses.
Yeah, look, we have, just to be clear, usually we have trucks coming into our gantry here and loading. As a result of the emergency response, we've very appropriately stopped that from happening. But the same trucks are still lifting from our terminal up in Newport or in Spotswood in Melbourne, which we supply from the refinery by pipe. So while there's been an interruption locally here, that trucking activity has continued from an alternative location in Melbourne.
Is there more? When do you expect trucks to be then coming back into that?
Look, that'll be something we'll be working really closely with FRV and others on. I don't know if you've...
So we've already started to allow vehicle access back on site for various key production measures on site. So including in the near future, ships being able to redock at the jetty and be able to start continuing to support production on site. So we are working through a very, very deliberate risk control process to ensure that we're not introducing any further risk or compromise the operations of the site. So while we're still in control, it's an emergency, we're managing that, but we are moving in conjunction with Viva towards what the future looks like as far as restoration and return to normal. Also want to advise, while we're here, that we have organised for a community meeting tonight for the local community at 6 o'clock at the Henty Street Community Centre at 36 Henty Street, Corio. And we'll be there representing the agencies to speak to the community and answer any questions and be able to tell the community exactly what went on and any concerns or actions that we need them to take. So at this stage, the emergency has been managed very, very well. We don't anticipate any change in that. However, it is a very dynamic site.
Just another question to Bill. Do you have any other units that can convert this gas into gasoline in the plant, or is this the only two facilities that do that?
This is the only facility that does the specific job that the unit that was impacted does, but we do have other alternatives that do help us to mitigate the impact of not having that unit.
What are those alternatives?
There's a bunch of alternatives that are, I'm not going to try and attempt to explain them here, but they're sort of detailed changes that we can make to our the way we direct and cut hydrocarbon streams in the refinery too.
And just to be clear, that process is essential in the use of making unleaded petrol that's used in cars that we make here.
So the material that's made from the unit that was impacted is an ingredient into petrol, but it's not an ingredient that we can't do without. So with the loss of that unit, we will lose a little bit of production capacity on that front, but not a very large amount. So, and it's not going to stop us from making on-grade gasoline.
How are the people that actually work in that plant?
So the AMWU says that if this had happened in the daytime, 30 to 50 workers would have been in that unit, and it could have been much, much worse. How close a call was this?
Look, this was a serious incident, and I don't want to underplay how serious it was. We are determined to learn from it. We cannot have these sorts of incidents happening again. We typically wouldn't have that number of people working in the proximity of that unit on the plant unless it was completely shut down. So I don't think that's accurate.
They're saying there was going to be a shutdown mid-year, so
Yeah.
at that time there might be...
Yeah, so just to unpack that a little bit, when we do a shutdown, we de-inventorise the unit, turn it all off, make it safe. A very small group of people perform that activity, and then we decontaminate it, so take all the hazardous material away from it before we commence maintenance on it. So it's not the case that we would typically have that many people in the vicinity of that unit on any given day while it's running.
How about the people who were there? How are they holding up? Are they?
Oh, look, yeah, no, it was a difficult night, and I think that's not just my team. I think that extends to the other first responders, and many of whom are represented here. It was a difficult night, and it'll be a difficult time to come for people. We and indeed the unions as well are offering employee support to not just employees but also the families of people who have been impacted by the events, which were quite significant.
Well, one of the main concerns the union did raise was the delayed maintenance for some of the equipment on the site. Has that had any link to the failures?
Yeah, so there was no delayed maintenance in relation to this specific unit. We did refer to some delayed maintenance about a month ago as a result of the issues in the Middle East, but the maintenance that we deferred at that time was moving a planned catalyst change. So that maintenance didn't relate to the integrity of equipment on the site. That change related to a decision to not perform maintenance to enhance performance on the plant in light of the events in the Middle East. So there wasn't a link between any delays of maintenance and this event that we know of. Of course, though, I don't want to prejudice any investigation. We'll definitely look into all the details of this incident to learn from it.
And can you just remind us what specific piece of equipment like that?
So, yeah, it's called the MOGAS alkylation unit, was where the failure occurred. I won't sort of go into the specific piece of equipment that failed because, to be honest, we still need to really make sure that we forensically determine what the failure mode was at the equipment level.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.